Bad news seems to be all we hear each and every single day. There is bad news in our mostly dysfunctional politics all over. There is bad news everywhere in the world where division, cliques, and conflicting allegiances reign. And that means all over the world. There too is bad news in the world of believers who may be staking out their futures and, in many cases, also their peace of mind on matters that are really inconsequential. There is bad news in families all over, especially in poorer countries, where there is a preponderance of so-called global families, which is actually a euphemism for families that are separated and scattered all over the world. And that is for economic reasons, because they have to live their lives far apart from each other for the sake of earning for their children. There is bad news also in the geopolitical world, where the battle for economic supremacy entails wanton and selfish disregard for the integrity of the whole created world. In the context where I am, in this country that we love so much, more of the same bad news continue to make our blood boil in frustration, anger, or desperation, as the case may be. Just think of all the Senate investigations, or right now in these last few days, the congressional hearings. News of such brazen acts of corruption on the part of powers that be, that makes one wonder whether there is still hope for the whole forlorn and forsaken country. I am not sure the situation of turmoil that Habakkuk refers to in the first reading should arrest our bewildering slide into the slope of discouragement. But I do know, based on my Christian faith, that what Habakkuk eventually makes of it, the meaning that he draws from the sad experiences he refers to, has something to do with my state of discouragement and despondency. Like the proverbial rower, I move forward by looking backward. I look backward at history, the history of God's people, in order to chart anew a fresh destiny and weave a new story about the present and the future based on God's dream and vision for both me and the whole world in turmoil. We counselors and therapists have it on the authority of Alfred Adler that one powerful method to help people change and snap out of their debilitating slide to despondency is what is known as confrontation. Some authors now call it more benignly as carefrontation. I would like to think of Habakkuk as doing this for us in God's name. The despairing Habakkuk declares on the one hand, "Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and clamorous discord." But on the other hand, we hear him confront himself with God's declaration. Write down the vision clearly upon the tablets so that one can read it readily. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and will not disappoint. That vision, let us please remind ourselves, has together with it a promise. The rash one has no integrity, but the just one, because of his faith, shall live. The just one, because of his faith, shall live. We are now rowing in more than just turbulent seas. The ship of our faith is shattered and battered by all sorts of challenges and oppositions. We need to look backward at the history of God's chosen people if we are to move forward. But we need the proper tools to see clearly. We need the capacity of finding meaning even in apparently meaningless situations. We need the right vision. We have to have the right goggles. Nowadays, all we do when we do not know something is Google it. But Googling alone will not clinch it. We need to be more than just informed. We need to be formed, molded rightly, endowed with the wherewithal to make meaning come out of what appears to be meaningless. We need more than just Googled information. We need the goggles of faith, not just Google. Write down the vision clearly upon the tablets of our hearts and minds. All events and circumstances that unfold might be grossly dissonant with what we hear God tell us in His Word today. There is a great divide between ideal and reality all over. The already and the not yet of our faith appear to be separated by a chasm similar to that between Dives and Lazarus that we heard about last Sunday. At this point, a quote from Timothy Radcliffe comes in handy. He in turn quotes William Carlos Williams, who wrote, "Dissonance, if you're interested, leads to discovery." This sounds like a confrontation for me today. Convicted as I am by my lack of faith, my lack of ability to see meaning that hides behind the thick and lowering clouds of despair and discouragement. This much the psalmist also tells us, as indeed we remind ourselves after the first reading. If today you hear His voice, harden not your hearts. He does not stick to dissonance that leads to a hardening of the heart. He instead focuses on discovery, the same discovery of the rower who moves forward by looking backward. Propelled by the goggles of faith, his Googled information, perhaps oodles and oodles of discouraging information, will not crush his resolve to move on, move forward, and live. The disciples in today's gospel passage tell us as much. They don't Google for more information beyond what they already heard and know. They ask for the real thing. They beg for what is really necessary and essential. They beg for goggles to see beyond what they already know. Lord, increase our faith. We ought to take careful note of what is asked for. The request presupposes not a totally blank slate or a totally empty container. The request presupposes there is already some faith to start with, something to begin with. They don't beg, Lord, give us faith, but they say, Lord, increase our faith. There indeed is a great deal of dissonance in our daily lives, a great deal of moral distortion and confusion. In the current debacle in the Philippine Senate and in Congress, we cannot tell who among them is telling the truth. One says this, the other denies it. Who tells the truth? I don't know. In between violent accusations and vehement denials, the only truth that seems to come out is what we already know. Since the time of Adam and Eve, and what we know is what we are reminded of today for the nth time, that all of us are sinners and that all men have fallen short of the glory of God. What we know is that corruption is sin, and sin is what the middle letter of that three-letter word stands for, I. Sin has to do with you and I, with all of us taken singly and collectively. But there is one today who reminds us to clarify our vision. Above and beyond mere knowledge of facts, St. Paul calls to mind what we all need to apply ourselves on and use our talents and energies for. I remind you, he says, to stir into flame the gift of God that you have through the imposition of my hands. We need not more Googles of information, but fresh and renewed goggles of faith in order to stir into flame the gift that we already all have. The former only leads to further dissonance. The latter can only lead to discovery. And what we need is not for more dissonance, but discovery. Lord, increase our faith. And this, my dear friends, is your Kalakbay at Katoto in this week's episode of Puso sa Puso, saying, thank you, and God bless you, and have a pleasant Sunday.